Prajna is a Sanskrit word for radiant wisdom. In the first millennium, traders from India brought the practices of Buddhism and Hinduism to Southeast Asia. These wisdom traditions merged with the local animist beliefs of nature-spirit worship. This animist reverence for the natural world was infused by Buddhist and Hindu wisdom, or prajna. This led to a profound understanding of sacred nature, existing both in the environment and within all living beings. This is a personal yatra into the deep wonders and mysteries of Cambodia, Bali, and Java. At the beginning of the last millennium, the temples of Angkor were the ultimate destination for countless pilgrims on yatra from all over Southeast Asia. The city of Angkor was the royal capital of the flourishing Khmer Empire. With a population of more than 1 million people, this city was larger than Imperial Rome. For 500 years after the fall of the Khmer Empire, the temples of Angkor were covered over by a lush jungle, completely lost and forgotten. Hundreds of temples had returned to the organic embrace of the natural world. In the 19th century, French archaeologists began to reclaim them from the banyan and kapok trees. Ta Proom was a Buddhist temple complex. Three-quarters of a mile long. It was built in 1186 by King Jayavarman VII to honor his dying mother. Hundreds of apsaras and devatas flank the doorways and windows of Ta Proom. Celestial beings in female form. Devatas are the embodiment of Prajna Paramita, Sanskrit for the union of radiant wisdom and compassion. 3rd century, the great Indian beliefs of Buddhism and Hinduism began to arrive in Cambodia. These new beliefs merged with Khmer animism and its primordial worship of spirits in the natural world. Some temples in Angkor were Buddhist, some Hindu, and many others a blend of both. All were infused with indigenous animism. These faiths were new spiritual concepts, introducing the union of wisdom and compassion. The Theravadan form of Buddhism arrived in Cambodia in the 15th century. This southern school of Buddhism is still the major faith. Monks and nuns are arriving on foot at Angkor from many forest nunneries and monasteries. They are coming together here at Bayon for a 3-day full moon gathering. This will be a break from their intensive meditation practice. Many have walked for several days on yatra to be here. Banteay Srey is a Hindu temple that celebrates the truth of sacred nature in balance. The legends of Rama, Krishna, and Shiva are all recreated in the colored quartz. Banteay Srey is called the Citadel of Women, in homage to the female spirit. In Cambodia, the royal lineage was traditionally passed through the mother. The inheritance of land has also been matrilineal, from mother to daughter. The rich imagery of stone carving unfolds like a woven tapestry. The plant, animal, and god realms morph endlessly, blending, twisting, and yielding unique life forms. The ancient Hindu scriptures, the Upanishads, teach that every living being has an indwelling perfection within a wondrous whole. In Cambodian mythology, the Nagas were an amphibious race of magical serpent beings who inhabited glorious underwater kingdoms. The Khmer people believed their origins to be from the marriage of an Indian prince and a Naga princess. The lay community brings provisions to the monks and nuns on yatra. In return, the lay people receive teachings of the Buddha, meditation instructions, blessings, and spiritual advice. In Buddhism, this is the practice of dana, the profound generosity of selfless giving and selfless receiving. The Buddhist temple of Bayonne was at the very center of Angkor. The entire city radiated out from this temple. The royal palaces and everything in Angkor were of a gifted yet transitory wooden architecture. Only the stone temples remain. Only stone was worthy of the divine. Ten-foot faces of Avalokiteshvara, more than 200 smiling representations of the great Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara. Circling the weathered portals and deep silent niches, all paths lead to the central inner temple. This multiplicity of Buddha and being, looking out in every direction, amplifies the Buddhist concept of panoramic awareness. Infinite beings, infinite Buddhas. Infinite beings, infinite Buddhas. The original face of every living being. The Sangha eat a simple lunch at noon. It is their last meal of the day. Angkor Wat, the most famous of the Angkor temples, is the largest temple in the world. Spread over 500 acres, the temple complex was completed in 1150. Its architecture was fully aligned by astronomical calculations, planetary orbits, solstices, and equinoxes. Angkor Wat at different times was Hindu or Mahayana Buddhist, sometimes both. Throughout Angkor Wat, there are vast and extensive galleries of stone carving, including many life-size bas-reliefs of the ancient Hindu epic, the Ramayana. This is a revered tale of divinity, miracles, and devotion.
Sitaram, 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 Sitaram.
Angkor Wat represents the Cambodian universe, recreated in stone. The inner courtyards were filled with water, simulating the primordial ocean. Like Mount Meru, these cosmic mountains arose from these waters, towering up to the abode of the Hindu god Vishnu. Now a Theravadan Buddha is venerated here. Over 1,700 devatas surround the inner courtyards of Angkor Wat. Embodiments of radiant wisdom, the devatas mirror back the illumined spirit of being. Here, the lotus bud represents the latent power in the flowering of wisdom. Of all the celebrated stone carvings at Angkor Wat, the most renowned is the great Hindu creation epic, Churning the Ocean of Milk. Vishnu commands a giant naga or serpent to be pulled back and forth by 108 gods and demons. It continues for 1,000 years until the nectar of immortality appears. This is the divine paradox. The forces of light and dark work relentlessly together in one's life for spiritual awakening. "100 years after the completion of Angkor Wat, the Khmer Kingdom could no longer be defended against continuous attack, and this extraordinary tradition came to an end. Now, there are some simple shrines created by local villagers. The depth of the devotion remains undiminished. In the eyes of a Buddha, kings and sweepers, priests and watchmen, all share the same greatness of heart, an enlightened wisdom nature. Many of these nuns took vows as girls. Some are widows of the killing fields. Others have fulfilled their family role and have entered the last stage of life, that of the homeless, holy wanderer. During the Vietnam War, the bombing of Cambodia took more than 100,000 lives. The country was thrown into chaos, and a genocidal regime, the Khmer Rouge, took power. This temple is one of the many memorials to the victims of the killing fields. Ultimately, 1 in 7 Cambodians died. Nearly 1.5 million people. The wounds of this recent Holocaust are healing. Yet, every Cambodian family lost someone. Most of the monks are either young or old. Many of the monks who would now be middle-aged were killed by the Khmer Rouge. This gathering is a reflowering of the Sangha, the community of the faithful, restoring a sacred balance. The royal baths were part of a vast palace compound. Here, the family of Angkor kings would enjoy the pleasures of water. The Buddha taught that inner peace is a transforming power in the world. The nuns and monks share a remarkable sameness of being. It is beyond age, gender, or social privilege. Grounded in the earth beneath them, they share an illuminated identity. This is the southern Thai region of Krabi. Across the South China Sea from neighboring Cambodia. Here, amid these islands of limestone towers, is a pilgrimage cave of mythic potency. Couples trying to have a child leave behind brightly painted wooden phalluses. This is a local ritual dedicated to the fertility goddess, with its roots in animism, surviving in the modern world. Devotion to the fertility goddess is one of the most ancient of all forms of spiritual practice. The greatest part of Earth's surface is ocean. The greatest part of the human body is water. Carried along in these tides, we begin each life floating in the boundless sea of a fertile womb. Across the Straits of Malacca, several hundred miles away, is the giant archipelago of Indonesia and its legendary islands of Java and Bali. The island of Bali is a Hindu enclave within Muslim Indonesia, a living outpost of the culture that flourished over a millennium ago, all through Southeast Asia. Bali retains deep and profound roots in an ancient animistic past. Hinduism has been richly overlaid on animism's dynamic interplay between the forces of light and darkness. Here, there is a unique blending of both Buddhist and Hindu influences. Through its traditions and highly ritualized culture, one glimpses how people may have lived throughout Southeast Asia 1,000 years ago. The Saraswati Temple is in the middle of Ubud, the cultural center of Bali. Saraswati is the Hindu goddess of creative expression. Inside the temple, large elaborate costumes of mythical beasts are being created. They will be used in dances and tonight in a large temple procession through the streets of Ubud. They represent the powerful animal aspects of existence in service to the divine. In the Balinese language, there is no word for art. Whether it is playing gamelan, dance, sculpting, creating elaborate offerings, decorating the temples, or preparing for festivals, creative expression is an elemental part of all Balinese life. The marching gamelan's processional rhythm takes the faithful ever more deeply into the mystery. In the outer courtyard of the main temple in Ubud, The great Hindu devotional epic, the Ramayana, is being performed. The avatar Rama, his brother Lakshman, and his wife Sita are tonight all played by women. Ram is distracted by the illusion of a magical golden deer. The great demon king, Ravana, impersonates a wise old sage to trick Sita and to kidnap her. Sita mourns her captivity and is overjoyed at Hanuman's bold, clandestine visit on behalf of Ram. Giving him her treasured hair ornament, Sita says, "Take this to Ram. Tell him, rescue me or I will die." Hanuman prepares his monkey army to do battle alongside Ram against the demon kingdom. Ram shoots an arrow into Ravana and rescues Sita in this portrayal of the triumph of light over darkness. High in the misty mountains, within a volcanic crater, is timeless Lake Breton. These temples are dedicated to the goddess of the waters, Devi Danu, who yields fertility and abundance. Holy water flows down from this abode of the goddess into sacred rivers. Flowing from the ground, the sacred springs of Tirtha and Pool are considered the most holy water on Bali. The god Indra is said to have tapped them as an elixir of immortality for his disheartened armies. Like all holy water on Bali, these waters flow down into adjoining river systems, cleansing and purifying the land as it spills into the salty sea. One enters this cave temple of the god Shiva through the gaping mouth of a guardian demon. Here on the altar within this womb-like cave are 3 Shiva lingams, or cosmic phalli, where the spiritual union of the male and the female powers is venerated. Watching over this sanctuary is Shiva's son, the elephant-headed Ganesh, remover of all obstacles. Made from a symbolic collection of palm, banana leaf, flowers, rice, fruit, and sweets, Chenong are spiritual offerings created and placed in the environment as a daily spiritual practice. They are placed on the ground for demons and placed higher for the gods. Incense is burned to attract the deities to the offerings. After the essence is taken by the gods, they are no longer holy and are eaten by animals or swept away. This is a ritual of transformation from the mundane to the sacred and back again. The principal Balinese gods are rarely portrayed in form. We mostly see the guardian spirits protecting the sacred space. The deities are unseen, but are present in a formless state. The Balinese ultimately believe in one guiding universal spirit within all of existence. Twice each year, these families, with origins in the same village, gather together at this temple in the town of Ubud. Emerging from a devotional ceremony, the village members, wearing their special temple dress, will go on yatra to their home village. This all-day festival renews old family ties and friendships. It maintains a living connection to their ancestral origins. The festival is accompanied by continuous gamelan music. Gamelan is heard everywhere on Bali. A nearly all percussion ensemble, the gamelan is hypnotic, mood-inducing, and suggestive of other planes of reality. Made from all variety of fruits, these elaborate creations are spiritual offerings to the various deities at the evening celebration. After the gods have taken the ras, or essence, from the fruit, it will be taken home and eaten as divine leftovers. Now begins a late afternoon pilgrimage to their home village temple celebration. This is a shared pilgrimage through the afternoon countryside. Carved out of the solid rock face, 10 giant chandi, or shrines, rise above this peaceful valley. Legend holds that they were carved in one night by the fingernail of a god. For the Balinese, we are not separate from nature, but part of a wondrous whole of cycles and systems. The sky fills our lungs, rivers flow in our veins. The people live in a sacred landscape where every hill, stream, and valley has spiritual significance. Now, the yatra back to the home village temple has been completed, and the festival continues. These musicians will play very late into the night, as the intensity of their music ebbs and flows into countless reveries. In the very inner sanctum, the ritual offerings are made. Baskets of special food are presented and consecrated to be eaten later. In this ceremony, the memory of common ancestors is invoked and venerated. The wrathful appearance of these deities shows their power over darkness and scares away evil forces. These intense expressions of beauty and horror overwhelm the ego and compel a deeper surrender into the great mystery of divine paradox. All of Bali has been endlessly contoured to support the growing of rice, their revered staple and blessed grain. After the grain first appears on the stalk, altars are placed in the fields, and the rice goddess is said to be with child. The rice plant is regarded as a manifestation of Devi Shri, the goddess of fertility and abundance. The wind is unseen. One can only see the effects of the wind. In this same way, the goddess is also unseen. Created in the 9th century, the Prambanan temples were built by a Hindu king who married a queen from a rival Buddhist kingdom. Here, Hindu deities look very much like Buddhist bodhisattvas. Even Ganesh, the Hindu elephant god, is seated like a Buddha. With the rise of Islam, the last Hindu kingdom fled to Bali in 1478. Indonesia is now the largest Muslim nation in the world. The main temple represents Mount Meru, the abode of the gods, the cosmic mountain linking heaven and earth. Hindus believe that at special times, Vishnu, the preserver, takes the form of a human being to balance the forces of light and dark.
Sitaram, 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 Sitaram.
Sculpted into the surfaces of Prambanan, this multiplicity of divine beings mirrors back the image of one's own true sacred nature. The sacred feminine and its power as Mother of Earth, Daughter of Sky, Wisdom Bearer, all are celebrated in temples throughout Java Within Hinduism, the world of forms is born from the formless womb of the goddess. In a small village next to legendary Borobudur, this dark night of the new moon is a time to reconnect to the ancient ways of Javanese spirit possession. These are preparations for a long night of trance, beginning with the youth and ending with the men of the village. The members of this Muslim village celebrate its animist roots, invoking the presence of nature spirits. The village dwellers surround the arena in anticipation of the timeless, dreamlike current. The men invite the animal spirits to enter into them, obliterating their mortal identities. Without relent, into the night, the dancers go deeper into trance, intoxicated only by the power of the spirit. As the animal spirits inhabit them, the trance dance continues until each dancer is overwhelmed by the intensity, falling unconscious. As the spirits take possession, the trance drifts out of time, out of the known, into a netherworld of ritual magic. The night ends when the last dancer falls in trance. Emerging from this volcanic dawn is Borobudur, a vast expanse of radiant Buddha realms. Built in the 9th century and made from 1 million blocks of volcanic rock, Borobudur is a giant three-dimensional mandala. Here in the Southern Hemisphere, the expressions of esoteric Buddhism at Borobudur influenced this faith in far-off China, Japan, Tibet, and Cambodia. Pilgrims on yatra journeyed here from all over Asia to ascend this man-made sacred mountain. There are over 1,400 large bas-reliefs at Borobudur. Hundreds of thousands of torrential cloudbursts eroded these finely carved and painted bas-reliefs, melting them back into formlessness. Classic Buddhist texts inspire the teachings portrayed on the 7 levels of Borobudur. Called Visions of Worldly Desire, the realm of family life and society is portrayed here at ground level. Thus begins the spiritual ascent up this mystical mountain. The next levels depict the lives of Gautama Buddha, his past lives, his birth, palace life, and journey of awakening. After his illumination, the Buddha directs his open palm to the earth, grounding his truth, and invoking the Mother of Earth to bear witness. On the upper levels are the Gandaviyuha, the story of Siddhana, travels of a young man in search of wisdom. Still a lanky teenager, Siddhana goes on an epic yatra, training to become a bodhisattva. Entering into heavenly Buddha realms, other dimensions and world systems, Siddhana here pays profound respect to Maitreya, the future Buddha. Known as the Greater Vehicle, Mahayana Buddhism understands life to be a shared journey of awakening for all. This open secret, a shared perfection in nature, manifests in the face of every living being, portrayed here at Borobudur. Now the largest Muslim nation in the world, there are only a few thousand Buddhists remaining in Indonesia. In 1987, as a vengeful omen, the entire top of the stupa was blown up by Islamic terrorists. This was a deep outrage to the overwhelming majority of Muslim Indonesians who regard Borobudur as a great treasure of their cultural heritage. "72 bell-shaped stupas surround the central stupa. Within each stupa is a life-sized Buddha hidden from view. Local women hoping for a child grasp at the hand of the hidden Buddha to fulfill their wish. This bell has been cut away to reveal one of the hidden Buddhas. Arriving at the highest levels, all spiritual icons and forms fade away. The dissolution of form into formlessness. In the great vehicle of the Mahayana, there is a unitive vision of all beings traveling together on a great ferry boat. Circling its sun, this planet, the great ferry boat, a luminous yatra on an ocean of becoming. Planet Earth, Prajna Earth.
Jai Jagatambe, Jai Jai Jagatambe.